We'll just give people a couple of seconds to join and then we'll kick off. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Ethika Regulatory Change series. Today we're going to dive into CPS 230, but before we do that, a quick word from our sponsors.
The world has changed. We have changed. Ethika Group is meeting the moment with a woman-led advisory and talent firm, placing integrity at its core, leading by example for a more equitable future. At the forefront of emerging tech and regulation, we operate across key technical areas, providing pragmatic commercial support and superior talent solutions for businesses navigating change. Driven by purpose, we give back. Ethika elevates modern workplaces and strives to uplift humanity, empowering change for better tomorrows today. The world has...
We've got a great panel for you today. I'll be your moderator for this session. I'm Ramona Roach. I lead Ethika Group. We are an advisory and talent solutions firm. We're focused on financial services and innovation and tech. We are currently helping clients with a raft of regulatory change, including CPS 230. I have with me today Susanna, one of our legal advisors, and Richard, one of our risk and compliance experts. Thanks, guys, for joining me today. Can I start by asking you to introduce yourselves and also mention why this topic resonates with you? Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Ramona. Hi, I'm Richard Sheldon. I've been working in risk and compliance for over 30 years. Until recently, I was with Royal Bank of Canada, where I led their compliance division for Europe and APAC, and also led their global wealth management compliance. Just to put it in perspective, Royal Bank of Canada is the 10th biggest bank in the world with 96,000 employees. Why I'm interested in this and passionate about this over my career, I was accountable for a lot of regulatory change across a broad spectrum of jurisdictions and regulators. And I really want to utilise my lived experience in helping people with what is an extremely difficult task, particularly with fatigue within board, senior management and front office personnel.
Thanks, Richard. Welcome. And Susanna?
Hi, I'm Susanna. I'm a legal advisor here at Ethika, and from my previous experience working in-house, I know how challenging implementing regulatory change operationally can be. So I'm passionate about making it quicker and easier.
Well, we definitely need it to be that. So with this webinar series, we will provide helpful guidance on CPS 230 compliance so that you have all the practical knowledge to implement effective risk data aggregation and reporting practices. Today, we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so discussing the basics of CPS 230. So for some of you, this will reinforce what you already know, and for others, it will be a really good overview of what you need to know to implement. So as we move forward, each webinar will delve deeper into the requirements and expectations of the regulation, and it will help you prepare for it and remain compliant. Please do submit your questions in the chat and we will try to get them all answered today. And we'll also circulate the slides and the recording after the session. What's really great about Ethika is that all of our advisors have cross-functional experience, which is perfect for advising on reg change that spans all parts of an organisation, like CPS 230. So let's get into it. Richard, I'm going to throw to you on this one. There's a quote from Therese McCarthy-Hockey from APRA. What are global regulators really worried about? Is APRA concerned that CPS 234 compliance was moving too slow?
Yeah, I think definitely. So I don't know if people have seen or had the opportunity to see Teresa McCarthy-Hockey's recent speech, whereby she was outlining the disappointment the regulators had seen with the uptick and implementation of CPS 234, and that being a parallel to CPS 230, they're really going to light a fire under APRA authorised entities to make sure that they have this implemented. And I think one of the key components is APRA and ASIC, to that matter, want to make sure that if you're an insurance, bank, or super fund, you can provide the services that you're being paid for to customers, and that you can provide them when they're not disrupted. And the disruption part is quite key, because now it's so evident how interlinked financial services companies are with tech and third-party tech. So it's definitely 234. It is showing and has shown the regulators the concerns they have that companies aren't taking this seriously enough, and also how connected the whole ecosystem is financially to third-party providers who they don't have the opportunity to regulate.
Thank you. And Susanna, so if you can take us through now the main objectives of the regulation, what is APRA trying to achieve with CPS 230? We'll just move to the next slide there. Thank you.
Sure. As Richard mentioned, regulated entities are becoming more reliant on service providers to support their business operations. So APRA has introduced CPS 230 to ensure regulated entities are resilient to operational risks and disruptions. APRA has stated its main objectives for CPS 230 are to improve operational risk practices through enhanced governance and minimise the impact of disruptions to customers and the financial system. Really, what APRA wants is for boards and senior management to be able to evidence that they can effectively manage and control operational risks and maintain critical operations through disruptions.
Okay, great. There's already a raft of regulation in existence. So how is existing regulation impacted?
Well, CPS 230 brings together 5 existing regulations as well as global standards on operational resilience. Importantly, I should mention that CPS 234 remains unchanged and still applies. And unlike SPS 231, APRA confirmed that only material arrangements with material service providers are captured by CPS 230. Material arrangements that will be caught are those on which APRA regulated entities relies to undertake a critical operation, or those that expose the entity to material operational risk. Under CPS 230, organisations will be required to have the same level of understanding of their most critical third and fourth party service providers. Those providers will need to be seen almost as part of their own operation.
Understand. And I think Therese reiterated that in her speech recently. So summarising what you've both told me, it sounds like boards should really be focused, boards and management should really be focused on 3 key actions. Firstly, putting the right governance arrangements in place. Secondly, identifying critical operations and material service providers. And thirdly, beginning to develop really a whole new organisational mindset. Richard, anything you want to add to that?
No, I'd just like to reinforce what you've said there. And I think you've got to look at the CPS 230 falls under the umbrella of existing controls, such as CPS 220 and SPS 220, which is the overarching requirement to have risk management. Now, APRA are really looking at a risk culture to be developed within these organisations to ensure that people have appropriate controls and reporting for key elements such as operational risk, business continuity, material service providers, and keeping an eye not only third but fourth parties, but governance will be fundamental. And that's because this is where it will also link to other key pieces of legislation. We've already got there. FAR is likely to pass the Senate this week. And in existence, we have CPS 511, which will impact the remuneration of senior management if they fail to meet the requirements that APRA are putting in place.
Yeah, exactly. So, Richard, can you take us through what's new under CPS 230? What should entities be trying to uplift through their regulatory change programs?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it is a show me, not tell me regime. Like you have to be able to evidence to the regulators that you are in the process of implementing it and that you do have it. Secondly, it is customer focused. The regulators have been crystal clear that they expect organisations to be able to provide goods and services to customers, be that being able to access your bank account, lodge a complaint against an individual, ensure that a payment is made into an appropriate investment. So first and foremost, sit back, think what are the vital parts that the organisation offers to the customer, to the client. That is a critical service. Secondly, then there needs to be an end-to-end process looking at each critical factor along the pathway to the delivery of that service. That needs to be documented. Then there needs to be a testing program and testing the tolerance level that you can have an outage in any of those critical services that you provide. Now, we can come back to that either today or at another time, but the tolerance level, the testing of that, and the stress testing of that will be key things that the regulator will look at. The next one is material service providers. There is a broader definition of this, and also the requirement or the expectation that you will have controls, documented controls and obligations over those material services providers, so you as the organisation can ensure that they are performing to the level that they are contracted to do so. And you've already mentioned it, governance is key to this. And it's not only governance of the completed task, but it's governance from now to implementation, that this is sitting with the board and they're taking it seriously.
Perfect. So, Susanna, what if we try to adopt a strategy of flying under the radar? What happens if entities don't apply?
Well, APRA is laser focused on this. I think as early as next year, we'll see APRA calling out entities that it thinks are not well prepared for the deadline. There's a range of actions APRA might take on the slide just there, but the biggest risk is reputational risk in being publicly named, like Bank of Queensland was, as not operationally resilient. That's going to have a big impact on your business.
Absolutely. So, Susanna, can you take us through who CPS 230 applies to and the key dates that we need to be aware of?
Sure. CPS 230 will apply to APRA-regulated entities, being ADIs, general insurers, life insurance companies, private health insurers, RSC licensees, and it goes live from the 1st of July 2025.
Well, that sounds like plenty of time. Why are we talking about this now?
For existing service provider arrangements, regulated entities will actually have until the earlier of the 1st of July 2026 or the next renewal date of an existing contract to comply. Although the date for compliance might seem like a while away, significant preparation will most likely be required, hence the push from the industry for APRA to allow at least 2 years to prepare. APRA has publicly stated that it won't be waiting for the implementation date to examine industry readiness. Regulated entities will be expected to demonstrate that they have made meaningful progress to comply with CPS 230 in 2023, and next year APRA will be assessing entities' preparedness for the new standard. This is less than 6 months away, so if you need help progressing towards compliance and fast, let us know.
Absolutely. So, Richard, do you think this is really enough time to implement CPS 230?
I think part of the problem is regulatory fatigue, that, people that are implementing regulatory change, boards and senior management have. So it's actually really being able to package this in a way where the board sort of can understand the consequences of not actually getting this right. And also, dealing with third and fourth parties, and we had the experience of this in the UK, it is difficult for them to engage and understand that things are changing. And the earlier you can start engaging with in material service providers, the better it's going to be. Because, you know, that is an unknown, and I'm sure they don't really understand the impacts and the problems we've had. And we even had the situation in the UK where the regulators were telling us that maybe we could not utilise third parties, and this was for brokers, a key part of the financial system, who were not actually providing information that we needed in relation to run our surveillance systems.
Wow. Well, there's a fair amount to do there. And Susanna, from a legal perspective as well.
Well, there's no doubt that these requirements will require companies to start reviewing, drafting, and negotiating contractual agreements with service providers, which can take a bit of time. We're already helping clients manage this aspect of by leveraging our legal expertise through Ethika Law and our innovation and tech team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited about the ways we're combining our technical expertise with AI, for example, to tackle regulatory change. Now, that is obviously within the risk-based approach set out by Therese and APRA, but some really innovative solutions there. So turning to our audience now, let's take a quick poll. Audience, where are you in your CPS 230 journey? You can select to vote anonymously on your screens now. There's no judgment if you haven't started. Right, Susanna?
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer here. Every organisation has a different level of risk to manage in implementing CPS 230.
Perfect. Let me just see if I can see the results of that come up on our screens. I'll just give you a second to answer the poll. We might circle back to the results of that towards the end there. So I can't see that on screen. So let's keep going. For those who haven't started yet or are just starting, where should they begin, Susanna?
CPS 230 is an extensive set of regulations to implement. However, it will be much easier if you plan and come up with the right roadmap. Starting with educating your team, senior management, the board, and relevant stakeholders on the requirements and implications of the regulation. If you need to implement change management as a result of this regulation, you want everyone in the organisation understanding why. Next, consider the size, nature, and complexity of your operations and assess how CPS 230 applies to your organisation. Then identify key personnel and designate a cross-functional team responsible for CPS 230 implementation, including representatives from risk, IT, data management, change management, legal, compliance, and any other impacted business units. Then start planning. Start early and at a high level. Conduct a gap analysis, start building your end-to-end process maps, set clear objectives for CPS 230 compliance, and create a comprehensive project plan that outlines tasks, timelines, responsibilities, and resource allocation for each phase of compliance.
Thanks, Susanna. So it looked like over a majority of you have started your CPS 230 preparation. So that's great. But let's do a quick poll now as to what you're finding most challenging, what's exercising your mind. There's a few on the screen now for you to choose from. So I'll give you a couple of seconds there. It might be one of those, or it could be all of them. It's a pretty challenging set of regulation to uplift. So Richard, any thoughts from you on the most difficult aspect of implementing this change based on your experience with similar regulations globally?
I think it is. I think the difficulty is not to overcomplicate it, which, you know, we've just discussed how complicated this is. But, you know, look at your existing controls that you have in place. Don't reinvent the wheel. And looking at it for enhancing how the business is run. Now, to do that, I think you need quite a clear outline to the board what is changing, what APRA's expectations are, and what as an organisation you're going to need to be able to do this. The cultural risk part of this and APRA's sort of heavy reliance and mentioning that numerous times is also key. They now consider this a business risk, not an IT risk or an operational risk. So to set up for success, I really think you should look back, look at the current regulatory change you've got together, and look at the connectivity that you have with other different work streams that may currently be ongoing, and really get that clarity of what end state should look like, so you get the buy-in from the board and hopefully the resources. Resourcing, and if people are doing this on the side of the desk, is normally the biggest issue. Sort of non-experience of people who are assisting and advising is difficult. And I think just regulatory fatigue. So looking strategically how to best do this, and at the same time being able to articulate to the regulators what you are doing would be fundamental, having done numerous big regulatory change projects.
Thank you. So it looks like the results of that poll were at an equal tie between resourcing, as you mentioned, technology weaknesses, and I guess the thought of having to review service agreements and contract negotiation, not everybody's favourite. So how can we help? Well, on the slide now, you'll see some ways in which we are helping clients now to implement CPS 230. And as you can see, it's very operational. We're not giving you high-level advice and walking away. Our approach is to augment your team to get you through periods of high workload, and we're certainly in demand during periods of regulatory change like this one. If you do need help, please reach out early. Start talking to us to ensure that your team can flex over the next 12 months. Okay, so we are almost at the end of our session already. Time flies when you're having fun, but we do have a few minutes for questions, so please drop them into the chat now. As I mentioned at the top, we will run this webinar series regularly, so you can keep up to date with all reg change. And we will be running actually a CPS morning briefing on the 24th of October. So please get in touch if you would like to attend that with us. And for those of you that came a little bit late, we will be sending out the slides and the recording so that you can watch it back later. Just here on the slide, you can see some of the links to the resources that we've mentioned today, so they will come to you by email. Okay, so we have received some questions that I can see. So let's see if our panel of experts can help answer these today. So there's a question here, Richard. How do you get the board's attention if they're not focused on regulatory change that's going live in 2025?
Yeah, I think one of the ways to do that is actually to bring this to life, and actually what is the consequences that can arise for the organisation or people personally if they do not meet the standards that APRA are looking at. Now, I think we mentioned Bank of Queensland earlier, but a more recent one in Australia is what happened with Medibank, where there was a APRA on the 27th of June, increased their capital requirements for operational risk by $250 million. Like, that's a lot of capital that you can't put elsewhere in business development, and it is extremely difficult to remove that capital increase or capital buffer once you have it in place. So that sort of makes the penny drop. Secondly, under existing sort of requirements in the UK, a bank, TSB, was recently fined just over 140 million Australian dollars, which was reduced to 100 for actually pleading guilty early, 3.5 years into the process, whereby there was a failure of an IT migration over a weekend where people were not able to access funds or make payments for a period of 3 days. Now,
Wow.
the other important part of this is the head of IT was personally sanctioned and fined 200,000 Australian dollars, I think it was 116,000 pounds, for failure to appropriately manage. And I mentioned earlier, BEAR and FAR, this is where the intersection of these other standards are coming into force to enable APRA and ASIC to actually start enforcing easier against organisations that not meet the standard. Now, if you do have an opportunity to look at Teresa McCarthy-Hockey's speech, it is quite clear that they are going to look to name and shame entities that do not comply with this or in the process thereof. So to getting board engagement, I've always found them clearly understanding that what are the repercussions of not investing and having the appropriate governance to demonstrate evidence. Remember, it's a show not tell regime, that they are going to comply with 230 and 234 for that matter within the timeframes.
Wow, that really does bring it to light. And I guess with those levels of personal liability, who do you think in an organisation should bear the responsibility for implementing and delivering compliance against CPS 230?
Well, they've made it quite clear it sits with the board. Now, the board can delegate accountability for this, but it's not delegate and forget. It's actually they need to be involved in assessing what is a critical operation, what is a material service provider, how the process and the testing will take place and who will do it. Now, key for this is, and I think this is important, that this is also part of any strategy or prep you have to the board, they need that information to enable them to make informed decisions. The governance from the executives to the boards and to the non-executives for many boards or trustees will need to demonstrate this to enable boards to make informed decisions. And I think this is one of the pivotal things you need to get across to your board is make sure you have the information to enable you to make informed decisions. Because if you don't, you should be requesting that of your executives or getting assistance in making sure that information is in a digestible form so you can demonstrate you have taken all reasonable steps. I'll just repeat that because reasonable steps is now the basis under BEAR and FAR, that you have discharged your opportunity to the shareholders, members, customers, clients in relation to the services that you're offering.
Thanks, Richard. And Susanna, last word to you. If you had limited resources, which it sounds like many are in that position, and time to dedicate to CPS 230 uplift, where would you start?
Thanks, Ramona. Well, firstly, I would get a strategic plan in place. I would then do a high-level gap analysis. I would prepare a presentation to your board, make sure that they're aware of the consequences of non-compliance and the enormity of the work involved. And then lastly, I would call Ethika for support.
Oh, good tip. Yes. So thanks, Susanna, and thanks, Richard, as well for joining me today. There are so many ways in which Ethika can actually help here. Governance is one of our strengths, as is risk and compliance. And as I mentioned, implementation support. And we also run Ethika Law, a full service law firm. So our cross-functional expertise really lends itself very well to implementing regulatory change like this. If you need support now, or you think you might need support in going forward, please do reach out. Skilled and experienced Australian resources are going to be hard to come by. Thank you for your time today, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
The world has changed. We have changed. Ethika Group is meeting the moment with a woman-led advisory and talent firm, placing integrity at its core, leading by example for a more equitable future. At the forefront of emerging tech and regulation, we operate across key technical areas, providing pragmatic commercial support and superior talent solutions for businesses navigating change. Driven by purpose, we give back. Ethika elevates modern workplaces and strives to uplift humanity, empowering change for better tomorrows today.